Welcome to Combat Theory Presents, a weekly podcast about all things martial arts, fight science, and combat sports. I'm your co-host, Sammy Ryan, and our latest episode starts now.
All right, guys, we're doing a very bare bones episode of the podcast this week. Of course, my name is Paul, the evil Professor Antonelli, and I'm joined by my good friend, Alex Lebhar. Hey, what's up, Alex?
How's it going, Coach?
It is going. We have decided that we're going to do kind of a all things conversation today. I don't know exactly how it's going to go, but we will figure it out as we go. So, Alex, tell me a little bit about yourself. Would you describe yourself as a wrestler?
Yeah, so my background in the martial arts world is solely wrestling. I joined in 8th grade, got recruited by my high school coach to try out for a summer program, and I thought it was the WWE. Little did I know it was not the WWE. They don't slap the mat 3 times when you're pinned. They slap it once. And I fell in love with it immediately. It gave me a lot of structure. It gave me an ability to strive for goals. It changed my life and my health, and it really gave me a vehicle to pursue college and pursue all the lofty goals that I've set for myself in my life. So I owe a lot to it, and that's why I'm still involved in the sport.
So you were in 8th grade and you started wrestling. Had you done like sports before that, or?
I had done t-ball, baseball, and it was bad.
Yeah.
And I was an overweight kid, so I was getting bullied a lot. And I had started in middle school trying to change that, and wrestling put that lifestyle change into overdrive for me.
Now, you were in Florida at the time, is that correct?
Correct.
What is the, obviously I think when a lot of people think about wrestling, they think about like Iowa or like the, I guess the Midwest and that being like the hub of wrestling. What is wrestling like at the like middle school, high school level in Florida? Is it pretty large?
Yeah, I would describe it as emerging. It's a really up and coming state. It's producing high level, top level athletes. I like to say that our elite athletes in the high school level that get recruited to college compete with the best in the country. What I've noticed recently is the depth of our state is getting better. It used to be our average guys would get toasted by the average guys in Iowa and Pennsylvania. Now our average and above average guys are starting to compete in more national tournaments, getting more exposure. And I think it's leveling the playing field a little bit for us down south. Sure.
So you got into in 8th grade. You wrestled in high school?
Yes, I did. Year round too.
Year round? So what does that look like at the high school level? Is it you're doing a certain amount at school, and then are you in clubs?
Yeah, so during the high school season, which is typically from November to March, you are usually solely associated with your high school. Now kids have opportunities through clubs and private lessons to get extra work, but a lot of it during the high school season is you go to practice. You may have optional weightlifting or conditioning outside of your typical practice window. Everything else from, say, like if you have night weight cutting or workouts, those are kind of on your own.
Yeah.
During the summer months and the off season, you have your high school teams that will usually develop some kind of club program. For us, our high school had a club at the community center where I grew up, and we would train on the mats 2-3 times a week, and then we would weight train at the school 2-3 times a week, compete in the occasional weekend tournament, travel to some tournaments out of state as well.
In high school, wrestlers compete a lot, right?
Correct.
I should probably tell the audience that what I know about wrestling. Those the diagrams where they circle, like they do the 3 circles, and they have like the one place they all meet. There's a name for that. What is that called? Like maybe a Venn diagram or something.
Yeah.
So what I know about wrestling is only the wrestling that is, like how much wrestling is in like MMA. But like that's such a small like subchasm of what it is to be a wrestler and what wrestling is like. I've been around wrestlers for, most of my adult life because that's inherently a part of mixed martial arts, and you get a lot of wrestlers that transition into martial arts later on because I think they like to be a part of something still. But how many times a year does the average high school wrestler in Florida compete? Do you know?
At this point, if you're healthy and you're competing at a high school schedule, you'll probably get somewhere in the 50 to 60 match range. on average if you're a varsity athlete.
Is that a year?
That's a year. And that's just in the high school season.
So so over 4 years of high school, you could potentially compete 200 times.
Yes, and there are some kids at the 1A level, which is private schools, where they allow middle schoolers to compete. Some of these kids get over 200, 300 career wins. At least the most elite athletes do. So the exposure to tons of competition experiences is, it's limited only by the amount of tournaments you're willing to go to.
So you competed in high school. When you got out of high school, you went to college?
Correct.
Where'd you go to college at?
I went to the University of Central Florida.
Oh, me too. Charge on. Go
Knights.
So UCF has kind of a complicated situation with wrestling. What was it like when you were there?
When I was there, UCF had a club program under the NCAA, and essentially they're not sanctioned by the NCAA, so they don't receive funding from the school, the institution. It's essentially like a club. So if I were to start a chocolate lovers baking club, right, I have to do all my own fundraising, but I still have to register it at UCF because of liability and enrollment with students. And the NCAA, while I'm not super educated on the eligibility criteria, it does have to involve, you have to be enrolled at UCF.
Yeah.
You have to maintain GPA requirements, but it's not scholarship dollars like you'll see at, say, NAIA and the Division I level.
Sure. What did you get your degree in?
I got my degree in English language arts education.
Okay. What was your plan?
My plan, after my high school experience with my coaches, was to become a high school English teacher and a wrestling coach and develop one of those perennial top 10 teams for 20 years.
Oh, okay. So obviously today, you're telling me that you're a high school wrestling coach?
I am not. So life has a weird way of making some left turns.
My favorite John Lennon quote ever is, "Life's what happens when you're busy making plans." And I think that's really, really true because, to be honest with you, although my whole life I was in love with martial arts, I never envisioned or thought that I would be doing a podcast or creating a YouTube channel or teaching martial arts or cornering fighters. Like I knew that I loved martial arts, but I didn't know that I was going to be sitting here today talking to you. Although, I enjoy it, but it definitely, I think a lot of times when you're talking to young people, and I spend a lot of time talking to young people, they think that they have to have it all figured out. And I think that the truth is that you don't really have to have it all figured out. You just kind of have to have some ideas. At some point, you need to have some idea,
Kind of like a trajectory.
Yeah, where are you headed?
Yeah.
Not necessarily where you're going to end up, but just could you give me a general idea of where you think you are heading tomorrow or today, at least? I don't know, So how was competing in college?
So I ended up not competing in college. I got turned to a different route in being involved in wrestling. I had recognized I had to work to support myself through college. The scholarships were great, but still had to cover a few gaps. And on top of my part-time job on campus, my coach had got me involved in officiating at the high school level.
Okay.
And that became sort of a side hustle / passion project. And I ended up finding my niche in that area instead of coaching.
Yeah. What was that? Was there a aha moment on that, or was it just kind of one of those things where you were doing it for a while and be like, oh, okay, this can be a thing?
Yeah. So my initial plan was I was going to do it for 3-4 years. After I graduated, got my degree, I was going to quit it and go into coaching solely. And I had an opportunity after my second year on the whistle to travel to a national tournament in the off season at Virginia Beach called the NHSCA National Duels. And that's where you'll see some of the blue chip prospects at the high school level before they're going off to Penn State and Iowa and Oklahoma State. And being exposed to that level of competition as a referee lit a competitive fire in me that I thought I was never going to get again as an athlete. And being exposed to how to manage those different situations and seeing it at the highest level, I got hooked. And I realized that at a place like that, there's so many great coaches, but nationally, there's such a shortage of quality referees. And this is across all sports, not just wrestling.
Yeah.
That, hey, what if we had people that were really committed to being outstanding at this important aspect of the sport, making it function and grow? And because of the mentors that I've developed over the years and having experiences like that to hone my skills, I found that this was my calling in the sport, and this was my ability to give back instead of coaching.
I think that's a really like fundamental realization, right? Because I say this to my guys all the time. Your competitive window as athlete is really short. And I think people don't quite understand that, but like at the highest level in mixed martial arts, they theorize that you have about a 6 to 8 year window that you can be competing at like the premier level. And it has less to do, what we're seeing now is that it has less to do with age and more to do with damage accumulated over time. So if you started at 20 in high level MMA, there's a strong possibility that by the time that you reach like 26, your career's done, right? Or we see a lot of heavyweights start a little bit later, but they still have that kind of same like maybe 6 to 8 year window where they really can't compete at that level that much longer, right? Because their body just takes too much damage. And now somebody at home, there's outliers. There's people that have been around forever. And then there's people that have very short windows as well. But for me, I'm super competitive. Like I am super, super competitive as a coach. I'm super competitive as someone that does commentary. Like I want to be the best at what I do. So I can take my love of martial arts and still compete. It's just not going to be me, the fighter. It's going to be me, the coach, or me, the guy doing commentary, or me, the guy with the podcast. In the same way, for you, I think that you're saying that it's like you, the referee, can be, hey, I can be the world's best referee in this thing that I love. Now so after you got out of college, you did get a job working as a teacher. Is that correct?
I did. So I spent a year teaching at Seminole County Public Schools. I taught 10th grade English, and it was about as smooth a first year as it could have. I could have written it up. I mean, I had good kids. I had great support system. I was well prepared, and I was like, hey, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this for 40 years, and this is how my life's going to go. However, I was cognizant to the data, and the data in public ed, especially in Florida, is 50% attrition rate after 3 years for teachers. And I knew that if I was going to stay, I wanted to get my master's degree to get the supplemental pay bump and also just get some subject matter expertise. But I also recognized that it had to be something versatile enough to where if I became part of that attrition rate, I was going to be okay professionally. So after that first year, that next summer, I enrolled in grad school for my English Technical Communications degree. And in that first semester, I was courted by a lovely employer who offered to cash flow the rest of my college degree and give me a raise. And at 22 at that time, it was something that I couldn't turn down. It was just such a no-brainer for my future that I was willing to take that risk on my career because I knew if for whatever reason it didn't work out, I could always go back to teaching. And if that's my worst case scenario, that's a pretty awesome life, at least in my view. But if I pursue this new opportunity and the growth potential is what it ended up being, I could gain a whole new portfolio of skill sets, and I could create a great foundation for my life to give myself options to do things like officiating and training in MMA.
Sure. So you still have so now today you have a full-time job.
Correct.
And you still officiate.
Yes.
How often are you doing that?
During the wrestling season, it is basically every Friday, Saturday, I am on the mats all day. During the off season, depends. I'd say on average about once a month, doing just various tournaments around the state or maybe even traveling. I know some of my friends who do the collegiate level without any high school. They just do the Division I, Division II level wrestling. Those guys are on the road quite a bit. Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Sometimes they're doing a weekday dual meet 4 or 5 hours away. And a lot of those guys have the flexibility in their jobs to do that. Some of them have to make some sacrifices. And I'm still trying to grapple with where that level of sacrifice is going to be. And it's similar to fighting, right?
Yeah.
There are guys who are elite and are able to sacrifice other things, or they have the flexibility in their life to go all in on MMA so that they can become that top 1% of the top 1%. Your Khabibs, your George St. Pierre's, right? And for me right now, I'm trying to see where that ceiling is going to be without fully disrupting the rest of the foundation that I built for my life.
Yeah, of course. I think that's one of the things that there's a point in your life as an adult where you really start to have honest conversations about, like, what is this going to look like for me? If you have these, I hate to say this because I'm someone that chases my dreams, and I always have, but I think you also have to start having like real conversations. Like I said this earlier off camera, but like, little known fact about me, there was a point in my life where I was convinced that I was going to be an actor. And I wanted to be an actor, and I wanted to do like theater, and I wanted to do TV, and I wanted to do all these things. But I also was like, I really am not going to move to California or New York. And I think that had less to do with, like, I like to travel and I like to take chances, but a big part of me, and this is going to sound kind of crazy, for a lot of my 20s, for my late teens and my early 20s, or all of my 20s, I really valued stability over all other things. And having a really stable job, and having a place to live that I could go to every night, those things were valued to me more than anything else. Like, more than anything else, I wanted to have stability. And I think that with some of these non-traditional roles and jobs and lives, you have to have a lot of risk. Like, you have to be willing to take risk. And when I was in my early 30s, I was miserable and I had all the stability that I could ever want. A part of me was like, man, if I'm going to continue to do this thing, if I'm going to continue to be involved in martial arts, if I'm going to continue to go after the things that I want, if I'm going to continue to chase my dreams, maybe I'm going to have to give up on the stability a little bit. And I like to work. I was saying that to you earlier. I enjoy working, so if you are willing to work, if you're willing to do like a 9 to 5 and then travel every weekend to officiate, you probably get paid. You can probably make money. You can probably figure out a way to have some more stability. But you got to work, man.
Yes, there is a cost to everything, and there is a cost to giving up those weekends, but it was something that I decided when I decided to commit to the sport of wrestling as an official, that this is my service. This is the debt that I owe the sport that has given me so much. I'm willing to negotiate the other aspects of my life to make it conducive to this passion that I have for something like wrestling.
I think that that's kind of unrelated, but I think also related. One of the funny things about, I went to school, my undergrad degree is in exercise science. And one of the things they always say about like coaching or training specifically, is like, oh, it's great. You get to make your own schedule. Sure. Yeah. You get to make your own schedule. But if you want to be an official, man, you're going to have to be an official when there's matches. Like, it'd be really cool to be an official, like, Tuesdays from 4 to 7, but maybe that's not when matches are happening. In the same way, if I want to coach people, man, I kind of have to assume that it's going to be when people are available. So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
One of the things, because of how much time I see that you put in your coaching, it's like, if I'm going to spend this much time committed to this one pursuit, I might as well be good at it, right? And I talk to a lot of officials who are trying to get better. And like, you guys spend every weekend away from your families doing this, getting yelled at by coaches and parents, dealing with kids that are basically fighting each other every weekend. Wouldn't you want to be good at it?
Yeah, I think that this is one of those things that you can't afford to be bad at. And I think as an official, like, okay, if I'm a fighter and I'm not great at it, I'm probably not going to do well, so I won't keep competing. I'll eventually be like, oh, I always lose. They won't give me fights anymore or whatever. If you're a coach and you're bad at it, hopefully, you won't continue to have students, although that's something that we could talk endlessly about, because I think there's a lot of coaches out there that, for whatever reason, aren't particularly good, but whether it's they're in the right place at the right time, they just continue to get work. But if you're an official and you're bad at it, you could really hurt a lot of people. Like, a lot of people could end up getting hurt because you don't know what you're doing. You don't know when to make choices,
And that applies to the UFC. I mean, you see these guys, lives are on the line every time they step in the cage. And if they don't stop something fast enough, someone could go out and never wake up.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, we have seen in combat sports, we have seen, you know, where things went awry and people suffered lifelong consequences because of it. So you taught for a year, you loved it, you decided that was not going to be for you. Maybe I shouldn't say you loved it. It went the way you thought it would. Yeah. And you decided it wasn't for you. There's a lot of ways that we could take this conversation. So when you were competing, did you cut weight?
I did.
How much weight did you cut?
As much as 12 pounds a week my sophomore year.
Okay.
And I would highly discourage that. I would highly recommend doing sustainable practices and weight management to where, say, my senior year, I was maybe dropping 6 pounds a week.
Okay.
Very doable, very sustainable, and I wasn't getting hurt. I wasn't getting beat up. I wasn't facing challenges that way.
I don't know if we can talk generally about this. So first off, for those that are listening at home and you're like, I don't know, about 30 minutes in, less than that. No, I'm kidding. You're thinking like, well, what does this have to do with martial arts? I want to make this very clear and so that you guys understand this. I think that when most people think about martial arts, they think about Asian fighting systems. They think about karate, they think about kung fu, maybe they think about like, you know, the Japanese judo or Japanese jiu-jitsu, but that's not what a martial art is. A martial art is any systematic approach to learning how to fight. Whether that is a European style of fighting, like sword fighting, or that is a Japanese style of sword fighting, whether that is a Roman style of fighting, like pancration, or, gladiator fighting in the Colosseum. Any form of fighting is a martial meaning war, and art, meaning that there's a systematic approach and some amount of self-expression. So wrestling is a martial art. Could you use wrestling as a self-defense system? 100%, man. If you can control someone's body and slam them on the ground, you probably will win. There's a strong possibility that the fight will end. Do you think of yourself as a martial artist? Is that...
I would describe myself as an emerging martial artist. As we've talked about, Paul, I joined the gym 2 months ago, and I've been training pretty heavily in Muay Thai with you to diversify myself, because I'm always known as the wrestler. But what if I was Alex, the Muay Thai specialist? And I'm learning how to apply what I've learned from wrestling, the hard work, the attention to detail and technique, the commitment, and applying that to something that's not as kinesthetically natural for me. Throwing my legs above my head to kick someone in the head, not as kinesthetically natural, because I'm used to being hunched over, knees, shoulder, knee, toe, and in a stance for wrestling.
I think also too, and this is probably going to piss some people off, wrestling is a naturalistic form of combat. If you look at primates fighting, they will try to out wrestle each other. If you look at two very small children having a disagreement, they will try to out wrestle each other. If you look at, I just got a puppy. My puppy tries to out wrestle the other dog. Wrestling is a naturalistic form of combat. When it comes to something like striking, like Muay Thai, that is not a natural form of combat. We're teaching you an unnatural system of combat. That's not to say that it doesn't work. That's not to say that it isn't something that you can make feel natural. When you first start off, I think a lot of people come in and they say I'm like, oh, I want you to stand this way. And they're like, oh, that doesn't feel natural. Yeah, but it's not going to, because your body was not designed to put your fist into someone else's face. Your body was not designed for me to take my shin and put it into your shin or put it into your leg. And I think that is the part that people have trouble understanding. Wrestling is naturalistic. If you look at, the things that are probably a good idea in wrestling are probably a good idea. You could think that it's probably a good idea, man. The things in Muay Thai that are often good ideas, like, hey, this guy's punching me, I should go forward instead of going backwards. not a great idea. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't feel natural, right? Like, this is something I have a lot of trouble explaining to people. If you are in trouble in Muay Thai, if you are in trouble in a striking art and you're getting punched, if I step backwards, which seems like the best idea, let me get away from this person. I'm going from being in his punching range to being in his kicking range, and I'm giving him space, which means now he can load up his shots and continue to follow me in. Wherein if I jam him, I go into him, that's going to actually probably be a little safer for me, and I can force a break or whatever. But I think that doesn't feel natural. And that's the number one thing that I get from people when they first get started. They're like, oh, this doesn't feel natural. It's not going to. It's not a naturalistic form of combat. What do you think was the most different for you when you went from like wrestling to Muay Thai?
I think just learning to stand tall.
Yeah.
I mean, as someone who gets into level changes to take shots for takedowns, you tend to drop your head. And in Muay Thai, that's an easy way to get knocked out because you're going to get met with a knee or a kick.
Yeah.
And learning how to be comfortable with maybe my hips a little bit more forward and my head up. Those were some different things that I wasn't used to. But as I practiced the footwork, it's very similar. Don't cross your feet across each other, else you're going to get swept. Those things applied. And as I was taking things that were familiar, activating that prior knowledge, as they would say in education, that's where I started finding that progress sooner rather than later.
Yeah. What part do you hate?
The clinch, I hate that I can't just like throw somebody.
Oh, it's weird. Yeah.
I'm just like, I just have to knee them or push them away and get back into my fight stance.
Yeah.
I can't just hit a fireman's carry.
Yeah. Why don't I just take him down right now? Can't. Rules, man.
Tell that to Rob.
For those that don't know, we had a recent tournament, and one of the guys in the gym, he went for the sickest, like, double leg body slam. I don't even know how to describe it. And he scored it. It landed, but it also ended up getting him disqualified.
And a top 50 on World Star Hip Hop. Rob, we love you, by the way.
There was a man in the audience that had a shirt that said Raw Rob, and I was like, what is this WWE? Like, what just happened right now?
He needs a walkout song for sure.
Yeah, for sure. When you walked into the gym and you came into the gym, we have a wrestling program for those that aren't like training with us, obviously. Hopefully, a lot of people that are listening right now are not training with us, but we have a wrestling program at the gym. So that's initially what attracted you to the gym?
Correct. However, while the wrestling attracted me, I knew I wanted to do something different.
Okay.
And I picked Muay Thai instead of jiu-jitsu because I felt like it was going to be harder. And wrestling was great for me because it taught me to pursue things because they're hard, not in spite of them being hard. Because it wasn't natural, I found it as a challenge. And at that point in my life, I knew I needed a new challenge. And I felt like Muay Thai was the perfect avenue for that.
I find that a lot of employers, a lot of people really value the wrestlers as a commodity when it comes to, like, I've talked to people that were like, oh yeah, I got hired at this job because I was a wrestler. Why do you think that is?
I think culturally wrestling values hard work. It values accountability. It's similar to cage fight, right? It's you and the other guy. You can't blame somebody else when you lose. It's on you. Maybe you didn't prepare enough. Maybe you were mentally checked out or you gave up in a tough moment. And the preparation and the hard work that you get from grinding in a practice room and training year round and setting those goals, those are very applicable to all facets of your life. And that's why that community has so much pride in those characteristics. And that's why it's so tight knit, because it's such a great breeding ground for great individual people, both men and women, especially with women's wrestling becoming one of the most emerging sports in high school.
I didn't know that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, one of the fastest growing sports in high school right now.
No kidding. What do you think? Is it just, women feeling more empowered, or what do you think is causing that?
Probably a combination of a few things. One would be that it's now being sanctioned as an official sport at the high school level. It recently just went through its inaugural sanctioned season here in Florida.
Okay.
Otherwise, it was kind of like a weird purgatory, kind of official, not really official thing. So there's opportunities. There's also opportunities growing at the college level for girls to compete on scholarship. And I just think that with the addition of balanced programs athletically, you're going to have more opportunities for women because there's just more programs available. And now that there are Olympians that are getting gold medals for the United States, having those kinds of role models show that it's something that's attainable for women too, not just the men.
Yeah. I think that we're kind of seeing mirrored in MMA a very similar thing where it's like, listen, Gina Carano, Cyborg, there's been women involved in MMA for a very, very long time. But unfortunately, because of a lot of things, they were not seen at the highest level. And also because they were not seen at the highest level, you didn't have a lot of female athletes that were transitioning from other sports into MMA, where we've always had male athletes that were transitioning into MMA. We didn't really have that much with female athletes. And then love her, hate her, Ronda Rousey, was the one that brought MMA to the forefront for women. Now, there were, standing on the shoulders of giants, right? There were pioneers before her. So I'm not going to say that Ronda Rousey was the one that created women's MMA, right? But she was the one that kind of exploded first, right? But even at that point, we didn't have female athletes. We had female martial artists that could say, oh, okay, I'm really good at judo and now I can try MMA, right? Or I'm very good at maybe kickboxing and now I can try MMA, right? Now we're starting to see like the generation after Ronda Rousey, we're starting to see like real female athletes that have been training since they were kids, that have always been involved in whether it's wrestling or some other type of, maybe combat sport, that they're now fighting in MMA, which I think is one of the reasons women's MMA is so exciting right now, is because there's still this there's still this influx of people that are really excited about the sport and are now for the first time really athletic, wherein maybe before, and don't poo-poo me, some of the women involved weren't as athletic. Just like in the same way, in the early 2000s, late 90s, you had a lot of guys that were getting involved in MMA that, although they were martial artists, they weren't necessarily athletic. They looked a lot more like me and a lot less like John Jones.
And also, I just think the quality of athlete, because of how much past experience there is from 20 years of competition, guys are coming in more well-rounded. They're more skilled. I mean, you talk about this with debut fighters being more skilled than they've ever been. And I think that's great, both for men and for women.
Yeah. I think also, too, that, the thing that's really fun about MMA, or the thing that's really fun even about Muay Thai, is that we're still developing best practices. So it's not like you have this, I know so little about other sports, but in the NFL, right? Like if you watched, when I was a kid and I watched a football game, and I'm an adult and I watch the football game, the nature of the game has not changed drastically. The level of athlete has changed, has improved over years as science improves and athletic training improves, but you don't see like drastic differences. Like if you watched a football game in 1998 and you watch a football game today, I mean, the game's relatively the same. With MMA, because we're still evolving as a sport, it's changing drastically. And I think, too, we're starting to see a little bit more specialization. I talked about this on a previous episode where, there was a time when you were training with at like a gym where maybe your wrestling coach was also your striking coach, who was also kind of teaching you submissions. And now we're starting to see guys that can be specialized, where maybe you have a guy that just does wrestling for MMA, at your gym, and maybe you have a guy that just does jiu-jitsu for MMA, because there is a difference, like Muay Thai for Muay Thai versus, Muay Thai for MMA. Those are different. You have to understand the rule structure. You have to understand the loopholes. You have to understand how to, yes, I can do clinch in Muay Thai, but my clinch game in MMA, although similar, is going to be different because there are takedowns, right? And I do have to contend with the fact that now I'm, doing clinch with a wrestler who has a whole different arsenal and tool set, and I have to use my tools to like nullify his tools, which is possible. I don't think that there's any one completely dominant system in MMA, and that's kind of what makes MMA beautiful. And then also, yes, now we're starting to see athletes that are like 5 that are going to gyms that are MMA gyms. So from day one, they're wrestling, they're doing jiu-jitsu, they're doing some type of striking. And by the time they're like 16, 17 years old, they they're amazing compared to the way, when I was dealing with people when I started that were single martial arts disciplines. And for a long time, they still were, so I think that's unique. Obviously, we know that, or I should say we should know that wrestlers typically transition to MMA really, really well. Do you have a theory on why that is? Is it the same thing, or?
I would say, one, they know how to train hard and they know how to get themselves ready to compete at a very high level. It's just so normal to their wrestling experience that the transition's smooth. They understand the concepts of weight management and weight cutting because they have to do it. And not only do they have to do it, but they also have to do it with a 2-hour window, a 1-hour window before competition. They don't get 24 hours to hydrate and sleep and eat 3 meals before the competition.
Yeah.
I think also just the grind of a training camp wears on you mentally, and being able to go through that grind, having that past performance in your repertoire, I think that translates well too, because you know how to go through the suck with your teammates and for your journey into the fight.
I think one of the things that I say a lot, and it's, again, I'm not a wrestler. I don't ever want to claim that I'm a wrestler because that's just not who I am. Like I said earlier, I have like maybe 2 things that I know how to do somewhat okay. And if you're a wrestler and you see me do it, you're like, that's terrible. When I was in high school, I played soccer. It was the sport that spoke to me. And like anything else, I got into soccer when I was in like 3rd grade and I played through high school, right? Soccer, when you train soccer, like after class, you go out onto the field. If it's a nice day, it's really pretty out. There's a bunch of people on the field. It's breezy. You're running around. You're having fun. No one's really touching you. You're doing soccer-based drills, which are usually pretty... they're kind of things that you would probably do if you were hanging out with your buddies and had a soccer ball. Wrestling is very grindy. Like, you're in a warm room that's typically not very well ventilated. You're dealing with a lot of intimacy, for the lack of a better term. It's very close, and that, I think that kind of grind, I think that you kind of nailed that on the head, is that, learning how to grind anything makes you has the potential to make you much more successful. Because that's one of the things that people don't understand about Muay Thai or about fighting in general. It's like there's a lot of grindy nature. If we're trying to perfect a kick, how many times are you going to throw that kick? Right? Like, you might throw that kick 100 times a day. I see these challenges where they're like, you're going to kick the bag 200 times a day for 30 days. That's cool, but if you're like a high-level Muay Thai fighter, you're probably kicking the bag 200 times a day for your entire life. And that grind, I think, is unaccustomed. Most people are unaccustomed to that style of grind. Even me, like, when I got out of soccer and I really started to focus on martial arts in my like late teens, early 20s, I didn't understand that, like, to be great at this, I'm going to have to grind 6 days a week. And it took me years. It probably took me like, up until I was about 24, 25, 26 to go, oh, if I want to get good at this, I have to show up every single day for the rest of my life. And there's still a ton of things 20 years in I suck at. I try to tell that to you guys when I'm teaching, like, hey guys, I'm going to show this to you. I'm not great at it. I'm probably never going to be great at it, but one of you might be really, really good at this one particular technique or skill. So I'm not going to not teach it to you because I suck at it, because I'm hoping maybe you won't. But maybe it is your tool or it isn't your tool. I think that's one of the things that that Bruce Lee talked about was, using what was useful and getting rid of what was useless. But the other caveat of that is that you need to revisit those things. Those things that you kind of put to the side, years later, you need to go back and say, okay, I know that I stopped doing this because I wasn't really good at it. But now that I've been training for, 5 years or 6 years or 7 years, am I better at it, or is it still not my thing? And that will evolve. But I think a lot of times people, like, they just discard stuff and they never revisit it. Or they'll have something that doesn't work at their gym. And then because it doesn't work at their gym, they just say, oh, this doesn't work. But maybe just everyone understands the setups because we all have the same setups because I taught it the same way, or whoever your coach is taught it the same way.
And I think one of the challenges for a lot of combat athletes is if they go through one system for so long and then they join a new gym, they have to teach themselves to be coachable again. And that's a muscle. That's a technique, is to learn how to learn. And for these different skill sets, right? Like if I learn how to block a teep one way, let's say I elbow parry it, and then this other gym's teaching me to catch the teep. It's not wrong. It's just different. And learning how to incorporate both of those just gives me more tools.
I think too that I've tried to have this conversation with a lot of people. Styles are opinions. And some opinions probably have more validity than other opinions, but some opinions are just opinions. Like I teach the way that I like to teach. I teach what I think is great. But I also try to show, like, for example, on the teep, I stopped teaching the scoop on the teep. I started teaching, like, Liam Harrison elbow parries the teep. I have a video on my YouTube channel about it. Plug the YouTube channel. But Liam Harrison teaches elbow parry. And I saw it in the video. And then when I went to a Liam Harrison seminar, which I like to go to a lot of workshops and stuff because I think continuing education as a coach is incredibly important. And he taught the elbow parry off the teep, and I was like, oh, I really like this. And for a while, I was just teaching like the elbow parry of the teep and the catch of the teep because I don't like the scoop. I think there's a lot of ways to manipulate the scoop. Well, here's the problem. I stopped teaching the scoop, right? So then when my guys were getting scooped in competition, they didn't, A, know what it was, and B, they didn't know how to manipulate it because I stopped teaching it. And I was like, oh, like that's a big problem.
And that kind of goes to how you talk about your A-level stuff, your B-level stuff, and your C-level stuff. Most guys have their A-level thing that works on everyone until it doesn't. And it's like, if I don't have some B and C level stuff that I'm intentionally practicing regularly, how am I going to overcome the obstacle when my good stuff doesn't work?
I think that I should caveat that. So typically I teach that you have essentially 3 games. You have your A-level game, which is the stuff that always works for you. It works for you in sparring. It works for you in drilling. It works for people that you're competing against or you're drilling against or sparring against that are better than you. It works on people that are the same level as you, and it works on the people that are like a lesser level than you. That is your A game stuff. Your B game stuff sometimes works. C game stuff rarely works, and then anything below that, never works. The problem is that most martial artists, they have a couple of things that are A game, and they never work on the other stuff. Okay, and every time they spar, they only spar their A game stuff. Whenever they go to competitions, they only do A game stuff. And because of that, it severely limits their ability to develop their game. Now, that's kind of hard to explain to people, right? Because, like, first off, and if you're in sparring and you're sparring your team and you're not preparing for a fight, you're just sparring, how much of the time should you be working on your A game stuff? Probably not that much, right? Because that stuff really works for you. You know it works. You should be working on your B game and your C game. But I think a lot of times, I said this last week, we don't really talk about, like, a lot of people don't talk about sparring when it comes to etiquette or sparring when it comes to what is your intent. Because a lot of people think of sparring as winning. We're going to do 10 rounds. I'm going to beat these guys up. But you can't win sparring. That's like the fundamental truth is there's no winning in sparring. Like there's not a referee, there's not judges, they're not going to hold your hand up, or at least they shouldn't hold your hand up after a sparring round. You need to be working on stuff that is not great for you, that doesn't work, and you need to make mistakes. And you need to be in a gym where when you're sparring and you make mistakes, you're not going to get knocked out. And that's another thing about culture, where like you have to be in a gym where you can work on your B game stuff and your C game stuff, and you can grind on stuff that rarely ever works, and your partner's going to kind of make fun of you when it fails in a teasing, brotherly, sisterly way, but they're not going to clip you, and you're not going to have to go to the hospital.
Yeah, and you need those opportunities to scaffold those skill sets in a low consequence environment. And what do you think is one of the biggest challenges for coaches, for other gyms that don't necessarily see sparring in that kind of etiquette?
I think that first off, they're burning a lot of people out that would probably be very successful, but because they're putting them in an environment where they're sparring really hard, or they are sparring too soon, that they're washing out the people that would probably be really successful long term, but they need a little bit of a softer, slower approach. That's probably the thing. And then my second thing would be like their contact injuries are probably really high, like unnecessarily. Like, look, we have contact and non-contact injuries, right? In any sport. In, MMA or Muay Thai, we are going to have contact injuries based on, hey, I got kicked, I got punched, this guy held a submission too tight. Your gym should be really limiting contact injuries. Like, you shouldn't be having a whole lot of contact injuries in drilling and even in sparring for that matter. Non-contact injuries have more to do with the athleticism of the students. It has more to do with their prehab. It has more to do with their lifestyle. But contact injuries, if you're in a gym where you're having broken noses every week, or, you're having, really, really bruised up body parts, that's probably not conducive to a great environment. I think it also goes back to wrestling. If I have to wrestle with the same guys 5 days a week, there's guys that are intentionally hurting people, they're going to get washed out pretty quickly. People are going to be like, nobody wants to go with him. No one wants to be his partner. Nobody wants to train with him. So I think often when I bring wrestlers in, they know how to gauge intensity pretty well. That is the one thing I would say that, like, obviously wrestlers are very grindy, and they understand commitment, and they understand like long-term success. And I think one of the things is that they also understand how to work with a lot of different people. Like, typically I see wrestlers that can they can dimmer switch their power, they can slow down, they can speed up, they can do all of these things, where sometimes athletes from other kind of endeavors don't really get that, because they don't really have to deal with that until they approach like Muay Thai or MMA or striking or something.
And one thing, and I hope this is the case in Muay Thai, but what you'll see often in a wrestling room is it won't just be one athlete at a weight class that's really solid. It'll be 3-4 weight classes back to back to back to back, because they
have training partners.
Yeah, they have training partners, and they develop each other in a conducive environment. And
again, this is a team sport. And I think that's the part that people, maybe a lot of fans, don't quite understand. And I think even like sometimes a lot of, early martial artists don't understand. You got to have people to work with. When you see like a guy like Khabib that becomes hugely successful, what do you see next? You see all his training partners start to also become hugely successful. One, because there's a spotlight on that gym or that person, and that light kind of shines over onto other people. But also because, hey man, if I'm building a conducive environment to being world class, there should be a lot of people around me that are also becoming world class. That's why I'm always saying that, like, look, I'm not trying to invest in one person. Like, if I was trying to, there's been people that have come through in the gym that maybe if I would have just invested all of my energy in them and focused nothing but my 100% of my attention, they probably would have gone maybe higher than they did. But that's not really, like, if you're trying to be a great coach, you're trying to develop something that's more than just one person.
And some of the most important people in a gym are the people who need the gym more than the gym needs them, or the program, if it's a team sport.
I think you said it to me the other day, and I think that's really true. Like, at the end of the day, me as a coach, I had a troubled childhood. I didn't necessarily have a lot of friends. When I got involved in martial arts, I fell very much in love with it. But to be honest with you, and I really don't want to offend anyone that's listening, I didn't necessarily have great coaches. I had good instructors. I had instructors that were really good at teaching whatever element of martial art I was interested in learning, and I seek those people out. I didn't necessarily have great coaches. I didn't have people that were creating the environment that I needed to be in, or were, being really honest with me and pursuing me to do the things that I needed to do. And I think that is what I'm trying to do, is I'm trying to create an environment is what I needed. I'm trying to create the environment that I needed when I was a teenager, the environment that I needed when I was a young adult, where I had these people around me that cared about me, but they were also being really honest with me and providing the feedback that I needed. And I think that sometimes, like, we kind of joke around about that at the gym, where it's like, I don't know if I can even say this, but like sometimes we're doing behavior modification. Sometimes people are coming in and they have some really nice attributes, but there's a few things going on that maybe need a little bit of an adjustment. And we as a team are trying to say, like, hey man, I love X, Y, and Z, but you'd probably be a lot more successful if you came on time. And I know that sounds kind of crazy because most instructors would not care. I think most instructors, the truth of the matter is they don't. This is how I differentiate the difference between an instructor and a coach. An instructor, hopefully, is very good at teaching whatever it is they're teaching you. They probably don't care about you outside of that subject matter. There's nothing wrong with that. You know what I mean? If I have been interested in learning dancing lately, is like taking some type of dancing class. I don't think that I care if the dancing instructor is going to ask me if I'm happy or I'm sad or how my day's going. I just want them to be really good at teaching me how to dance because I don't dance well. A coach should be really good at teaching, but they should also care about your longevity and your success. Like sometimes I'm talking to people when I'm talking about coaching and I'm like, look, I don't care about you winning one fight. I care about your success as a person over the next 25 years.
And those 25 years are a series of fights. It's, as you always talk about, it's an allegory of life. Life is a fight. And that's one of the reasons as a referee, when coaches get mad at me, I don't take it personal. I understand that this is a guy who sees this athlete. I'll see him maybe once or twice. They are with them 5-6 days a week, 2-3 hours a day. Surrogate dad for a lot of these kids who may not have the family structure that's stable. And how could I blame a guy who's fighting for his kid when he's heated like that?
I'm sorry. I think one of the things for me as a coach, which I didn't necessarily expect, because I don't think you start off as a coach. Maybe you have the title, maybe your title is coach, but I think at first you start off as an instructor. You're teaching what you hopefully love and are passionate about. You're teaching the way that you were maybe taught, but you're an instructor. At some point, hopefully, you become a coach. But, I don't think that's always the case. I'm sure there are people that are going by the name coach that, like, don't remember the name of the kids in their program. You know what I mean? Like, I hate to say that, but, like, for me, I will tell you that the longer that I coach someone, the harder it is for me to put them in fights. I know that sounds maybe kind of crazy, but like the longer that someone's with me, the more like fear I have about putting them in fights because listen, fights are hard. Every fight is hard, right? And also when you spend a lot of time coaching someone, you know how to beat them. And for you, maybe it feels like, oh, everyone can see this, kind of like personal flaws, like often people are very aware of their personal flaws. Like people will come to me as a coach or as a personal trainer or exercise physiologist or whatever, and they will tell me about their personal flaws. Like, oh, I don't like the way my eyebrows look. And I'll be like, listen, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't really think anyone else is noticing that. I think you're noticing that because you're very aware of your personal flaws. I think that as a coach, you become very aware of the problems that your athletes have, good and bad. And one of the things that happens is that the longer you're coaching, the more that you hopefully care for people, and the harder it is for you to be like, yeah, I think that's a good idea for them to fight. Like I think I get more nervous about the people that have been training with me for 3, 4, 5 years, when really they should be the ones that I'm the least worried about because they have the most amount of training. They're the most successful. But when someone first comes in the gym and they're like, they're asking me about fighting, I'm like, oh yeah, sure, we'll get you a fight. And then, someone that's been with me for 4 years or, they want to fight. I'm like, well, like you got to work on these things because like, if that gets exposed, you're going to lose. I definitely get more like personally attached, just like any other relationship. The longer someone's in your life, hopefully the more that you, are worried about their life or success or whatever. But I'm kind of rambling. I think that is to what being a coach is not just, is not just coaching whatever sport specific that you like. It's about, hopefully improving the lives of the people that you are coaching. And I also know that most of the people that come into me, they're probably not going to be involved in the sport for the rest of their life. As much as I wish they would, I know that sometimes that's just not the case.
But I think as you were talking about with a coach, I remember one of my coaches used to say, if all you learned in the 4 years in my room was how to hit a double leg, I failed you. And there's so much that you gain from learning how to do the double leg, learning how to train. That makes you a better person and makes you develop a passion and relationships with other people on your team. I think that's stuff that serves you very well in your life moving forward.
I think that the mistake that a lot of times with young children, parents come in and they think that they're like, I'm like, why are you interested in your son, doing karate or whatever? And they're like, I want him to learn discipline and self-control and willpower and commitment and all these things. And you'll see advertisements, for like a, martial arts school and like, your son's going to learn willpower and self-control and discipline. I don't teach any of those things. Okay. I do not teach, somebody comes in and I'm like, hey guys, let me explain to you the definition of willpower. And I know some gyms do. I know some like kids programs, they'll like, you have as a child, you have to memorize the definition of willpower. Man, that is such a poor understanding of what it is that we do. Because when you do something hard day after day, month after month, and don't quit in spite of all the evidence that you kind of suck, you develop things like willpower and self-control and discipline and commitment. And when, you don't feel great, but you know that you have to go into the gym today because your training partner's competing and you need to be there for them, even though you don't feel good, you understand commitment. Hey, I committed to this. Those are the things, those attributes that we talk about a lot in martial arts. And again, I say this all the time, fighting is an allegory for life. If you're able to do that really hard thing day after day, month after month, even though you don't need to, you don't have to, it makes you a better person in general. Problem is that we kind of live in a society where most people just give up before that. And I'll tell you that the biggest deterrent, or the thing that makes kids in martial arts the least successful, are their parents. I hate to say that, but a parent will come to me and be like, hey, my daughter doesn't like class. Well, she's 5. She probably doesn't like brushing her teeth either. You know what I mean? Like, again, I don't want your kids to do something they hate. But also, if every time your child's approached by something that's really hard, they give up, you're not teaching them willpower and self-control and discipline. You're teaching them how to quit things that are hard. And spoiler alert, life is very hard.
And it's not fair.
And it's not fair. Life's not fair. You know what I mean? Like, if you go into an event and you think the referee has a bias against you, well, then you better still win, because life's got a bias against you sometimes, and you still have to win.
And parents are one of the banes of our existence as referees. It's one of the reasons that there's a national shortage of referees and why the median age of referees is 55 years old. People don't want to deal with the parents because the parents don't take accountability for raising their kids and teaching them the life lessons of, hey, sometimes things don't work out your way. Sometimes a call goes against you. They teach their kids to project that accountability as blame on somebody else, so that it stunts their growth. And you'll see it with coaches too. I mean, they'll start getting on me. I'll be like, listen, man, coach your athlete, not me. I don't need you to teach me anything. Like your kid needs you.
I know the rules.
Yeah, for the 30 seconds you're complaining about a stall call, your kid was laying face down on the mat, not doing anything, and he probably could have gotten some instruction to get off the mat and score an escape.
Yeah.
And I think that is something as parents, right? Your job is to encourage your kids and to provide a stability and a structure for them to take those risks. And, if they go for it and they fail, it's not the end of the world.
And I think also, too, as a parent, and I've said this before in life, to be successful, you have to have the right people around you. And I think often parents, like I know martial artists, right, that are very good martial artists that have kids, and then they try to teach their kids martial arts, and their kids just they don't see them in that way. And it's like, to be very honest with you, maybe you're not the best person to coach your son or daughter. I hate to say that, but maybe you need to be the parent and not the coach.
And I think they need to realize that can be okay.
Yeah. I mean, look, dude, the first thing that I do when a couple comes into the gym, a husband, wife, best friends, brother, sister, whatever, is I try to separate them in training. Because I think that a lot of times that's not going to be the best tool for them. A guy comes in with his son and they're like, the dad's 6'2" and the son's 5'3", and they want to train together. And I'm like, listen, I know that you're trying to share this experience together, which you can, but neither of you are going to benefit from being each other's training partner. And sometimes people, they don't understand that either. Like, this is a sport, where you need to have varying training partners. Same thing. Like, we'll have couples come in, the husband and the wife, and they only want to train together. And I get that at first because it's uncomfortable, but also like, hey, dude, the likelihood that you're going to fight someone that's, 100 pounds lighter than you, although would be nice, is unlikely.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a good deal for the spouse, for the woman, because, if from a self-defense situation, unfortunately, the likelihood that she's going to fight another girl is probably not as high as the fact that she'd have to defend herself from a guy. So I get that. But also, this, it's a lot easier to work on a technique with someone that's about your weight class or maybe a little bit lighter than you than it is to work on a technique with someone that's 100 pounds over your weight, if especially if you don't understand the technique.
Yeah, and they don't move the way that you usually need them to move to do it right.
But what is I don't know if I can ask this. What is the worst experience that you've had as a ref, as an official?
So this was the one that got me on my first podcast.
Okay. Can we talk about this?
Yes, we can, because the hatchet has been buried.
Okay. It's about to be on.
I had a moment in a state finals match. All eyes are on, and series of events happen. Kid gets hit for another penalty, takes an injury time that turns to a blood time. Coaches are freaking out, and one of them questions the judgment at the table, so he gets hit for misconduct. These are all irrelevant terms for the sake of the general purpose of the story. But he gets penalized, and there was a glitch in the system that tracks the score and added a match point once I started the match back up and resumed it.
Okay.
And nobody caught it or could articulate it. Sent the match into overtime, and the wrong kid wins.
Okay.
And by the time we find out that there's an error from the glitch in the scoring, it was beyond correctable error because the next match had already ended. So all of a sudden, all hell's breaking loose at this huge tournament, a lot of ramifications. And I was crucified on this Facebook group with like 12,000 people for a month. And we had to explain the situation like, hey, there were some things that happened that were beyond our control that we didn't catch. There was a part where I failed, and you have to own those things when you fail. And I think it was an important lesson to show people, hey, we're humans who make mistakes. We're not like, it wasn't like we had this diabolical plot to screw this kid over. There was something that happened that we didn't catch. We couldn't articulate. The other coaches couldn't articulate and didn't know how to advocate for their kid in that moment. The other team may have known, and they didn't say anything.
Yeah, why would they?
And
I hate to say that, but
And I was explaining, if we had known that a point had erroneously gotten put on the board, we would have fixed it. It's not like we're going to be like, oh, never mind, we're going to keep it that way. Screw this kid.
You're way
Right?
behind now, bro.
But it caused a lot of problems, and I had to talk about it and own up to my part in failing there. And I had to admit, hey, there was a moment where I failed. I wasn't approachable enough to the coaches in that situation, and I wasn't managing this huge spotlight scenario, and it cost a kid, it cost a team, and a lot of people were upset, and it sucked. I mean, it made me contemplate, hey, is this something that I want to deal with again, or am I going to have this shadow over my career forever if I don't address this?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of really important points there. I think the one that kind of speaks to me is that at every level of the game, whatever the game is, you're doing something for the first time, right? Like the first time that I fought, the first time that I cornered someone as an assistant, the first time that I cornered someone as a main corner, the first time I coached as an assistant, the first time I coached as a head coach, all those had firsts. And for me to pretend or say that I haven't made mistakes throughout that would be unfair to the process. Sometimes I have made mistakes that are so minor, and there's been times where I made really big mistakes. And I'll give you an example without naming a lot of names. I am competitive, and I am very hungry to prove myself. And weight cutting, we practice weight cutting in my gym. We practice weight cutting in my sport, and that's something that's debated, because there are some coaches that do not weight cut, that don't believe in weight cutting. There's some athletes that do not weight cut, that don't believe in weight cutting. My opinion of weight cutting changes. It evolves, right? And I'm going to be honest with you, it evolves both ways. There's periods where I think weight cutting makes sense. There's also periods where I'm like, well, I don't know. Maybe it doesn't make sense in this case. So a couple years ago, I wanted to prove a point. I wanted to beat another gym. There was a gym that I was like, I think that we're better than this gym. We're newer, we're younger. This other gym's been around for a really long time, and we haven't. And I have a young team, and I'm hungry, and I want to win. And we're gonna snipe. We're gonna like take one out, right? Like we're gonna beat this guy that everyone thinks is unbeatable. And they had offered for us to fight him, but they offered for us to fight this guy at a weight class that was much lower than the weight class that we wanted our athlete to fight at. But my athlete is mentally very tough, and I knew that he could make that weight. I knew he could because he's mentally very tough. And I was so hungry at the time to prove that we were the better gym that I allowed my fighter to fight probably 2 weight classes below the weight class that he should be in. And we lost. We lost decision. It wasn't like we did really badly. But at the end of the second round, my fighter got clipped. And the official either didn't notice it or didn't care or just didn't know what to do. And my guy got clipped maybe, 2 seconds before the end of the round. So he should have had a standing 10 count. He probably would not have been able to answer the standing 10 count. But because the official didn't realize, we put him on the bench. And I was talking to him, and about 20 seconds in, I realized that he was no longer with us. He was asking me the kind of questions like, did I lose? The fight's over. What's going on? And I was like, no, you're fine. You're still, it's the end of the second. We're going into the third. Like, listen, this is what I need you to do. I need you to go out there and you got to clinch. You got to get this guy in clinch, and you need to fight from clinch, because I knew he was rocked. And I didn't want him to go out there. And, unfortunately in Muay Thai, there's not a lot of places that you're super safe. But I felt like my guy had enough weight on the other athlete that if he got him in clinch, he could kind of control him and maybe drag this to the end. And none of that registered with my athlete. And I probably at that moment should have ended the fight. you know, and as a coach, I had that ability. As a corner, I had the ability to say, yeah, we're done. I did not, you know, and we went back out there and he fought, you know, a kind of unremarkable third round, you know, but he was rocked, you know, and afterwards we talked about it and he had just no memory of the third round. And there are a lot of great stories about fighters that, you know, got rocked early in the fight and really don't have a lot of recollection of the fight, but still are able to pull off a win. Yeah, my fighter wasn't able to do that. He just, you know, fought kind of an unremarkable third round and went to decision. And afterwards, I blame myself. And I blame myself for two reasons. One, I thought I should not have let him fight at this weight class because we had to dehydrate him pretty severely. We had to cut him down really significantly, more than 20 pounds over like a week. And two, because he was so dehydrated, that clip where he got hit, it probably aided in him getting concussed because if you're dehydrated, you're more likely to get concussed. And then three, I should have ended the fight after the second. And I blame myself for that. And I can be open and honest with that, you know, and I think that sometimes a lot of times coaches, they are afraid to be honest about their mistakes because I need people to trust me. I hate to say that, but at the end of the day, if I tell you I need you to do whatever, I need you to do it without questioning it or second guessing it or wondering if I'm an idiot, right? Like I kind of joke around with my guys, but I'm always telling people like, just listen to me. I'm always right. But the truth is the matter is that like, listen, if you're an official, you're going to make mistakes. I judge fights. I've definitely made mistakes.
And to give you context, the top level NBA referees, guys who get paid six figures plus, the very best guys get 94% of their calls right.
Yeah.
I mean, 6% are wrong.
Yeah.
And that's the most elite of the elite.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing. Like, man, we're all going to make mistakes. Right. And I also try to like, listen, I try to train my people, that sometimes the official sucks. I hate to say that.
Yeah. I mean, it's like fighters. Some fighters just suck.
Yeah.
Like it
you know,
someone does something, some are going to excel, some are not.
And like, you know, so in Muay Thai, there's certain positions that should cause a break. So the ref should stop them. They should restart. Okay, let's fight. Same thing in MMA, right? I'm sure there's the same thing in wrestling. I don't know enough about wrestling to say that.
Yeah, it's called a stalemate.
Okay.
Yep.
So, I teach my athletes that how to force a break. Hey, if I do this and I do this and you know, he should break us and we're gonna restart. Well, shit, man. Sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes my guy does that and he's looking at me like, why isn't this guy breaking? And the ref's like, you know, it's like he's watching a different fight. And you're like, I guess we're just going to keep fighting from there. Do the best that you can. And we now, as my program has progressed, I teach that a lot more. Like sometimes when we do a lot of like fight simulations. We have a name for them. We call them tuning exams. But sometimes I will intentionally tell the referee, like, don't stop it. Or, hey, every time that they touch, I want you to break them. Because I want my athletes to learn that, like, hey, man, the referee might know the rules, but, like, let's be honest, sometimes they don't fully understand the rules, you know? We have fought Muay Thai rules in shows where the minute they got into clinch, the referee broke them. And you're like, hey, man, you're supposed to let them work in clinch like it's Muay Thai. We've also fought in shows where you could do anything and the ref was not going to break you. Like you could be, you know, like you've got a guy in a bulldog choke and you're punching him in the head and you're like, hey man, that's illegal position. And the referee's like, well, I don't know. They're fighting. So I try not to get really mad with officials when they make bad decisions, but let's be honest. I have been known to get a little hot sometimes with officials, usually after the fact. And I've had conversations with officials where I'm like, hey, this official, every time that I compete and they're the official, they don't understand the rules. Is there like a polite way that I can explain to them the rules? And they're like, probably not.
And it's tricky because I think there needs to be accountability for officials. However, we're also facing a shortage. So it's trying to grapple the balance between, hey, let's celebrate the guys that are willing and able to do this and develop those guys, but also create an environment where it's conducive to having that accountability, because it should be that way across the board. Coaches should be held accountable for their athletes. Officials should be held accountable for the proper arbitration of a competition. And yeah, athletes should be, accountable for their conduct and their competition, their performance as well.
I think what kind of the point that we're talking about here, though, is like you talked about wanting to be a great official, right? Mm-hmm. And I talk a lot about wanting to be a world-class coach, right? What does it require for that to be the case? Well, one of the things that it's going to absolutely require is for you to get some form of continuing education, right? Whether that is formal or informal, you have to have continuing education. Often when you become a coach or you become an official or you become a teacher, sometimes we don't understand how important that continuing education is. Like if you are an official, you should still be training. You should still be going to things where you're not an official. You should still be involved in your sport, not doing the job that you're doing, because being an official is a hat, just like being a coach is a hat, just like, frankly, being an athlete is a hat. It's not going to be the title that you have for your entire life, probably. It's just one of the things that you're going to do. But, and I'm sure that this exists in wrestling. I know for sure it exists in MMA and in Muay Thai. There are people that become officials that's all they do now. And they're not even watching fights when they're not at fights. And they're not talking to other officials about being better. And they're not going to continuing education courses because they don't really exist that much, especially in my industry. And I think that limits your ability to be successful.
And when people know that you're doing those steps to get better and you're showing it and you build that ethos, you command a different level of respect. I mean, you think of, at least in the UFC, guys like Herb Dean and Keith Peterson, right? Those are some of the top level guys. When you see those guys coming out to call your fight, you have a great guy who's put in the work to be prepared to make sure that you have every chance to compete fairly and safely. And I think there's a lot of pride in that, at least in a lot of the guys that I know. There's guys who are training to stay in shape because you got to be in shape to get to position to make calls. Yeah, you're studying the rule book and watching tape and talking about it because you want to standardize what interpretations are across the country.
I wish that there was it's funny because a couple years ago I had the privilege of going to the UFC's Performance Institute, and it was all these strength and conditioning coaches for MMA meeting together in one room. And the UFC was essentially presenting for a week best practices. And they were trying to really look at it from a strength and conditioning perspective. Hey, guys, these are the best practices for your athletes. And since they're also our athletes, we want you to understand kind of what we're expecting and, what you should expect from us. And the funniest thing, the craziest part was you have all of these CSCSs or exercise physiologists in this building talking to, the highest level people at the UFC on the kind of, physical therapy side. And the biggest problem was, hey, we understand that this is the best practice. We understand that this is the best way to do this, but we're having trouble expressing that to our sport specific coaches. What do we do? And they were literally like, we don't know. Because there's a lot of times in my industry, especially, where you'll have an old school coach that's doing something that is, and I'm not young, I'm 40 years old. Okay. I've been involved in the sport for a long time, but you'll have a coach that's maybe 15 years, 20 years older than I am, that's doing stuff that is definitely not a best practice, right? I think that the more and more we look at it, you need to limit your sparring time, especially your hard sparring time. If you are sparring a lot, it needs to be very technical, very safe. At my gym, we spar once a week typically, and it's very technical. Like, it's super rare for us to have any type of contact injury during sparring. But I've been in gyms that are sparring 2-3 times a week, or every time they spar, there's massive contact injuries where people are breaking noses, people are getting concussed every day. And the craziest part is that here I am at the UFC Performance Institute having a conversation with all of these other guys that are doing the same job I'm doing across the country. And this is back when I was a little bit more focused on the strength and conditioning side of MMA. And they're like, man, our biggest problem is that the sport-specific coaches that we're dealing with don't understand the science and the best practices, and they don't want to listen to what we have to say. And I hate to say this, but the truth is that sometimes what needs to happen is that if you are a coach and you're not doing continuing education, you should not be working anymore. But, okay, I went to a camp in Vegas for a weekend in February. In April, I'm doing another camp. I watch a massive amount of instructional video. I recently reached out to a UFC referee and said, hey, I know that you do some referee courses, and I'm really be interested in you coming to my area and doing a referee course. Not because I want to be a referee. I don't really know that I've never done that before, but I also don't know that I would be very interested in that. But if I understand your perspective a lot better, that's going to make me a better coach. And if I understand the rules better, that's going to make me a better coach.
And trust me, referees want the coaches to know the rules.
Yeah. I don't think, this is the problem. There's no criteria for being a coach. And maybe that sounds crazy to some of the people that are listening at home, but what makes you a coach? In my industry, people come to your class. I hate to say that. I have a bachelor's degree in exercise science. I'm completing my master's degree. I've been involved for, more than 20 years. I do continuing education constantly. I travel to learn from the best people I can learn from. I invite high-level coaches and athletes into my gym to do workshops. I do all of these things to build my resume, but at the end of the day, there's no licensure, there's no certification, there's no board, there's nothing. So, you could be teaching striking somewhere. Man, there's nothing to that is going to say that you're good at it or bad at it. And no offense, I have seen, because now I do commentary, because now I do judging, there are some coaches that are really good, and I see that because their students are very successful and their students are safe and their students, progress. And then there's some coaches that suck, that just really don't know what they're doing.
And one misconception I think a lot of people in sports have is they think that just because somebody was an elite athlete that they're going to translate to be an elite coach. And that's not always the case. Likewise, you'll have players who may have been average or below average, but turn into exceptional coaches. You see that in the NFL. They're guys that had a short career and then they develop top talent. And I know you talked about how throughout your career, it wasn't super long in the pro and amateur level, but you feel like you were a better coach because you learned how to hold mitts, you learned how to be a good teammate and learn how to run and develop others, which is a skill separate from being a competitor.
I've said this a lot. I think that the attributes that make you a world-class competitor and the attributes that make you a world-class coach are almost mutually exclusive. They literally, it's so rare that you get one person that's able to do both, and certainly not within the same window. To be a world-class athlete, by nature, you have to be somewhat selfish. You have to prioritize yourself over all other things. To be a world-class coach, you have to be selfless. And those are two very different attributes. One, two. Often when I'm talking to high-level athletes and I ask them why they did a transition or a technique, they cannot verbalize that. They do not know how to verbalize that. They'll say, I don't know, I just did it. To coach, you have to understand why you did it, and you have to be able to explain it. You know, I had an instructor, Sifu Courtney White, who was really beneficial in my life, and he would describe it as paint by numbers. You have to paint by numbers. You put your leg here, 1, you step this way, 2, you shift your weight here, 3. You have to be able to paint by numbers. And I think that's sometimes what happens is that when you're not a great competitor, or you're maybe not the best guy at class, if you still love the sport and you still want to be good at it, you start to spend a lot of time figuring out the drill, figuring out how to make it work, figuring out how to happen. I was not a great competitor. Now, some of that may have been, no offense, I didn't have great coaches. I didn't have people that were, coaching me the way that I needed to be coached. Some of that was that I developed some of my, I've struggled with things like, self-control and willpower in my life. And because of that, in my early 20s, when I was kind of a wild child, and even into my mid to late 20s, I had trouble committing to what it was really going to take to be at the next level for me as a competitor. But I love martial arts, right? And I say this often, you have to fall in love with the training and not the competing, because even the best fighters, they only fight 2-3 times a year. In wrestling, I mean, wow, you guys compete constantly, but MMA fighter, if they've competed 6-7 times in a year, that's huge. That's like a lot. I don't like my guys to compete more than 4 times a year. The best fighters in the world now, like in the UFC, they're competing once, twice. You have a guy like McGregor that it may be coming back for a title shot soon. I mean, he hasn't competed for 2 years.
And it's like you're considered active if you've competed 3 times in a year, which
it
doesn't seem like a lot, but I mean, when you think about the damage that they take in the fights, as well as in training camp, it makes sense why they can only do it at a high level that many times
in a year. My preference is a 10-week camp. I like for you to have a 10-week camp leading up to your fight. That's when if I schedule things out the way that I want to, I'm looking for 10 weeks of training. And that means you come into camp on weight. And what I mean by on weight is whatever your walking weight is supposed to be. There's a lot of different ways we can talk about that, but you come into camp on weight. Sure, you're not going to fight at that weight, but you're at the weight that you're supposed to be. If we have 10 weeks to figure out what your game plan is going to be and then just drill the shit out of that game plan. I've said this before, and kind of side note, there really is not a lot of learning in camp. When you come into a fight camp, you should already have all the tools that you need. We're just going to put together a plan for that fight. And then for 10 weeks, we're going to drill that. And then, you fight. So if you fight 4 times a year, that's 4 days out of 365 days, but you are in camp 10 weeks, 4 times, you're in camp for 40 weeks. I mean, that is like 280 days of camp, right? For 4 days of fighting.
And you have to be laser focused during those camps.
Laser focused. If you come into, listen, some of the biggest mistakes that I have made is that we're in the middle of a camp and one of my amateur or even young professional athletes lose their full-time job. I mean, remember, this is a sport where you can be a professional athlete, a professional fighter, and you have a full-time job. You work on a construction site and you train at night and you fight on the weekends. That's the nature of this industry. Where I've had, a fighter in the middle of camp lose his job. And I was like, okay, we'll make this work. We'll figure this out. I should have immediately pulled him out of that fight. I should have said, you know what? Lost your job. It's over. We can regroup after you find a new job. Same. I've had people that went through breakups. I should have immediately pulled them out instead, because I don't want to pull that away from them, I go like, oh, I don't want to take this thing away from them. They're driving towards. So, hey, I know that you're breaking up with your boyfriend, but we're gonna make this work. Do you still want to make this work? Oh, I 100% still want to make this work. And then day after day, their focus is drifting. Kobe Bryant said, it's not the number of hours I'm in training, it's the number of hours that my mind is present during training. And they're training and, they showed up, but their brain didn't show up. And I am just essentially leading a slow march to them getting a loss at best, and at worst, them getting physically hurt. And that's the thing. Like, you gotta fall in love with the training. You gotta fall in love with that 270 days of training, not those 4 days of fighting.
And as a coach, during that time, you're protecting the athlete from their opponent. But as you were talking about, you also grapple with being able to protect them from themselves.
Listen, that is probably the hardest part about coaching for me, is that I'm trying to make decisions for people that often don't understand that I'm making a decision for them because I want them to be successful, but they think that I'm making a decision because of my own personal whatever, and that's hard. That's hard because look, I get hurt by I get hurt when an athlete thinks that I am making the bad decision because I'm biased against them, or there's been times where I decide that one person's going to fight and another person's not going to fight. Listen, man, I'm picking the person that I think can win. I hate to say that, but if I'm picking, person A over person B for the same card, for the same fight, man, I'm trying to put you in a position where I'm setting you up for success. And if you're like, oh, I'm going to prove to you I'm better than they are, okay, I guess, that's cool, but I'm not doing that because I don't like you. I'm doing that because I want you to be successful, and this is not your moment.
And I think for a lot of athletes in that moment, they forget that, hey, I'm operating under the premise that my coach cares about me. And when they don't know that, or they forget about it, that's where they may feel like, hey, my coach is out to get me or doesn't care. And I think you do a really good job every day towards the end of practice, letting us know, hey, I care about you guys. I want you to be successful, not just in fighting, but in life. And I think knowing that when you do have to make those tough decisions and have those accountability conversations, it's a lot more digestible for the athletes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's a ton of people that would tell you that I'm terrible and they hate me. But I mean, I think that goes back to, like, at the end of the day, I was trying to explain this to somebody the other day. I want to go home and I want to, put on the TV and I want to veg out, and I don't want to think that I made decisions that were really bad for the success of someone. So if I'm erring on the side of not giving you a fight, it's not because I don't like you. It's not because I don't want you to be successful. It's not because I'm upset that, like, whatever. I had a guy come to me recently and he was like, I really want to fight. And I was like, okay, you need to train a lot more than you're training now if you want to fight. And he was like, why, you don't think that I can win? I mean, I think that you could win if you're prepared, but I don't think that the amount that you're currently training is fair for your own success. And I think he got kind of upset by that because he's like, well, this is the time that I'm able to commit to this. Okay, look, I'm happy that that's the time that you're able to commit to this, but that doesn't mean that you should fight. You alluded to this earlier, and I've said this a lot in training. The quality of debut fighter today in Florida, in Orlando, is higher than ever before. We have, I have guys that maybe 2, 3, 4 years ago, I would have been like, oh yeah, he could be a debut fighter. today, I'd say, you know what, maybe we need another 6 months, because every gym is getting better. Even if I don't like them, as a gym, I see that they are churning out more athletic, better, faster, stronger fighters. So maybe 5 years ago, you could train 3 days a week and do a debut fight. I don't know that you can train 3 days a week anymore and do a debut fight. I don't think that you're not going to be successful. And if you do win, which is awesome, great, thank you, happy for you, you were still limiting your potential, because maybe you should have won much better, or maybe you could have taken a lot less damage. And this is a sport where damage counts. And I mean that more than just in the fight. I mean, like, look, dude, CTE is real. And if you take a ton of damage in every one of your fights, and, 16, 17, 20 years later, you have trouble remembering things. I mean, that is a harsh truth in our industry. Look, same way. Listen, I don't want to poo-poo wrestling right now. There's a couple of things in wrestling that we know are not, just in our industry, we know are not super good. One, there are a lot of concussions in wrestling. I don't know why that is. I don't know enough about wrestling to even answer that question. Two, there is an epidemic of men that are in their 30s to 40s that are former high-level competitors that are having a lot of problems with testosterone production compared to men in that same age range that were not competitive wrestlers. Why? They don't really know. Maybe it is because of the nature of weight cutting in your formative years. When you are a teenager and you are essentially starving yourself to make weight, that is probably not great for your long-term success. So it's not like I am saying that, I don't know how to caveat that, but look, I want everyone to be successful. And look, there's a study in the 1970s. There was a very famous study in the 1970s that, they asked competitive runners, if we could give you a pill that would lead you to win the Olympics this year, but you died in 5 years, would you take it? And I think 90% of people said yes. So when you're a coach, really, what do you have to do? You have to be the one that's saying no. I want you to be successful, but I can't let you do things that are going to be detrimental to your success. And maybe if you train for 3 years, maybe if you train for 3 days a week, you can win your debut fight. But I think you're limiting your success from day one. And people get upset with me about that. And I'll tell you another thing while we're on that subject. How long have you been training Muay Thai now?
A little over 2 months now. 2
months. You did a PKB tournament pretty early on.
3 weeks in.
Yeah, 3 weeks in. And I essentially allowed you to do that for two reasons. One, PKB is considered a technical sparring, no hard shots. So you should not be, in theory, you should not be in a lot of danger. One. Two, you have a lot of competitive experience when it comes to wrestling. So you've been involved in a competitive environment. So I felt like going in, you understood kind of the dangers and what you were getting yourself into. But I have made the mistake before of letting people get involved in stuff that they didn't fully understand what they were getting involved in. And what I mean by that is, like, some guy comes in the gym and he trains Muay Thai, let's say, for 6 months, and he's getting pretty good. He's getting there, and I'm thinking, like, oh, maybe this guy could debut fight. And then he says to me, like, man, I'd really like to do a fight. And I'm like, you know what? I agree. I think that you're there. Let's schedule you a fight. So I get with a promoter, I match make him, he goes in, he fights. And then, win or lose, it occurs to me that this guy that just competed at this venue had never seen a fight in real life. Like, literally, they had never seen a real fight. Maybe they had watched the UFC, which is not what you're seeing at, like, your local gymnasium, and they had no idea what the environment was going to feel like, smell like, look like. They went in there with no understanding of really what they were even agreeing to. But that was a mistake for me, right? Because to me, if you say, hey, I want to fight, now I should say, well, there's a fight coming up. Why don't you go and watch? We have a few people fighting on the show. See if it's something that you want to do, so that when you decide that you want to fight, at least you know what the venue looks like, and you understand that, fighting locally is not fighting in the UFC. Those are two very different things. And with all that being said, the harshest truth of this industry is that you've been training for like 2 months. If next month you decided this was not for you and you gave up, it's still my career, right? Like, so if you do a competition and you make a fool of yourself and you decide this isn't for me anymore, that's probably not going to carry along with you. No one's going to think about that. No one's going to talk about that. That's my career. That's going to stay with me forever.
Yeah, it's a representation of something bigger than yourself. And
Yes.
I think athletes, as well as people in general, you have to realize that anytime you're representing yourself, you're representing everything that you stand for, any groups that you're associated with. And I learned that in college by joining a Greek organization, also known as a fraternity, that, hey, anything that I do is representative of 120 other guys. If I make an ass of myself at a bar, everyone's going to think this organization is a bunch of drunk assholes. If I do great things in the community, on the other hand, they will assume that this organization is composed of a bunch of guys that do great things in the community. But it only takes one guy to hurt your reputation. So as a coach, there is risk to allowing guys to compete under you.
This is something I say all the time. You represent me. When you have a shirt that says combat theory on, and you go to a bar and you make an a-hole of yourself, that's me. You're representing me. And we're not even qualifying how you have that t-shirt, right? I remember there was, and this is maybe a touchy subject, but there was an incident where a guy had committed a pretty serious crime, and he had a sticker from a particular, MMA gym on his car. And there was a lot of discussion in the community of, hey, is this guy trained there? Is this the kind of people that are coming out of that gym? And it turned out that he had never, ever trained at that place. He had just gotten a sticker, like secondhand from someone, and stuck it on his car. But it was an ongoing discussion. And that's the thing about, me as a coach. I don't have any children. But also I have like 100 children, because I'm responsible for all of these people. I recently had one of my athletes tell me that I was like the only father figure he ever had in his life. So I promptly yelled at him and made him feel bad, just so he'd know what it was like to have a father like the rest of us.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, in seriousness, like, I'm not trying to sound that I am more important than I am, because to be honest with you, I'm generally not that important. But what I'm saying is that for me, coaching is like being a pastor or being a priest or being a therapist, where people are coming to you and you should be doing everything you can to make them successful and make them better and turn them into a person that represents you in the world. Because at the end of the day, I have a team, but really what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to build a team of people that I want to live around. I'm trying to build the kind of people that I want to have as neighbors. And I also know two things. One, the vast majority of people that train with me will not train with me their entire lives. They'll probably train with me for less than 6 months. So I need to have a lasting, permanent effect on them in 6 months. I also know, and this is maybe controversial, because we are taught a lot that words, sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me. I also know that words are actually incredibly powerful, and that I could say something to someone and it'll stick with them for their entire life. And often it's not the thing that I think is supposed to stick with them. So I'll have people come back to me and be like, hey, do you remember this thing that you said? And I'll be like, I mean, loosely, that sounds like something I would say. And they're like, yeah, man, I remember when you said that and it stuck with me like for years. And I'm like, wow, wow, okay. And likewise, if I say something stupid or I say something that, unintentionally hurts someone's feelings, man, it still hurts them. I think that's one of the things that, like, as a coach, that is a very, like, sacred duty. And I'll be honest with you, I get pretty hot when I think that a coach is taking advantage of their job.
It's a big responsibility because so many lives are counting on you to do right by them.
Yeah, and also, I mean, this is probably an entire conversation that we could have. In my industry, there's a lot of scumbags and con artists that are claiming that they're coaches. And I don't know 100% why that is, but there's a lot of people that are in my industry that are like, I'll give you an example. I fundamentally believe that as a coach, you should not be dating in your student pool. Now, if you're coaching like middle school, you're like, duh, yeah, of course. I coach primarily adults. I feel like I should not be trying to date my students, even though the vast majority of my students are all in their 20s or 30s. I think that it is a weird relationship where you are this person that they look up to, that they sometimes idolize, which they should not. I'm not your God. As much as I joke around about, whatever, and always being right and being omnipotent.
Coach Paul is always right.
I am always right. I think that's important to understand. I'm not, and I am often surprised when I see people in our industry that are kind of using the gym as their dating pool. I think that is a violation of the relationship that you give to your students. Now, I'm going to give myself an out here. I've never had a relationship with one of my students. I try to avoid that at all costs. I'm not saying that it's not impossible, and I'm not saying that there aren't people out there that could do it and do it successfully. But what I'm saying is that, man, I know guys that are coaching that they're always dating one of their students, and that relationship fails, and guess what? They're dating another one of their students. And I understand it because I'm in the gym 6 days a week. So it would be very easy because, like, where am I going to meet somebody? Like at Publix? It'd be very easy for me to just meet somebody that comes to the gym and date them. But I think it's a kind of violation of their trust. And I also think it's a violation of all of your students' trust. Because you're going to start to have, listen, I already have conversations with students where they think that I'm showing favoritism to one person over another person. God forbid they think that I'm showing favoritism because I want to date that person. But, I'm also a kid that came to the realization when I was probably about 15, 16 years old, that this guy that I really looked up to, that really idolized as my martial arts instructor, didn't give a rat's ass about me. He was just trying to sleep with my mom. So why is this guy giving me all this extra attention after class? He really wants me to be successful. And as a kid that really needed a dad, that was like a really nice feeling. Like, wow, this guy really cares about me. This might be the first guy I've ever met in my life that really cares about me. And then I was like, oh, wait, he's just trying to sleep with my mom. And that ruined it for me.
And I mean, it's one of the reasons professional ethics in, say, post-secondary education, there's a reason a college professor doesn't date their students.
Yeah.
There's just that type of dynamic is frowned upon in our society, and it should be, because there's a power dynamic that can manipulate somebody, and it's shown a pretty good record of causing a lot of harm.
Yeah, but unfortunately, again, I think that a lot of times with martial arts, it's like the wild, wild west.
Yep.
And especially with the non-collegiate sports, so like there are a lot of people in my industry that are dating within their industry. And that's probably true in all industries, right? A lot of teachers probably date teachers. You know, a lot of doctors
Absolutely.
probably date doctors. You know, a lot of lawyers probably date lawyers. But I don't think it's right to date my students. And I don't think, frankly, and I'm a little like radical about this. I don't think that students should date each other. To me, I say this all the time. There are 2.37 billion people of the opposite sex. You don't need to harass the people that you're at your gym because it's your sanctuary. You come there for sanctuary. If you come there and now you have some awkward situationship and that makes you not want to go there, or worse, you still want to go there, but the other person doesn't want to go there, man, that sucks, dude. I don't want to be involved in that as a coach.
And it can be cancerous to the rest of your team.
Yeah, of course. You know, like I tell everybody at the gym that you get one. You get one. I say it all the time. And what I mean by that is that, hey, man, if you meet somebody at the gym and you take it really slow and you want to see if it's going to work, try. But if it fails, man, you used your one. You can't have one a week. You can't have one a year. It doesn't reset. You get one. So make sure that that one is really valuable. It's really the one that you want because, you know, man, if you're somebody that's working out, you're in good shape, you're training, there's other places. Listen, I'll go downtown with you and I can introduce you to a bunch of people. You know, like you don't need to be, you know, fishing in a bucket. You know, let's take you to the lake.
And if you're doing the things in your life that light you up and make you the best version of you, you'll eventually attract the kind of person that's conducive to that. And I think a lot of people will see that as they make those improvements in their life.
You know, and again, back to the behavioral modification thing, I think a lot of times that when people are coming to the gym, they're missing something from their life. And a lot of times when I first started training martial arts, the one thing that I wanted, the thing that I thought would be amazing is if I dated someone that did this as well, because I like to come here every day. Man, if I met someone that also loved coming here every day, that would be bliss. Spoiler alert, it is hell. You don't want to do that because then when you're arguing at home, that comes into the gym with you. And then if they do something in the gym that makes you upset or you do something in the gym that makes them upset, that goes home with you. And it's a never-ending cycle of you don't have a sanctuary anymore. And they don't have a sanctuary anymore because everybody needs to have something that is their thing that's just for them, that just means something to them.
Yes. And that was actually one of the reasons I initially came to your gym was I was going through a period in my life where I needed to repaint a picture. And one of the things that was really important for me was trying to find something that wasn't necessarily tied to a job or a side hustle. Yeah. And just finding something that was enriching for my life, my soul, and being around a community of people that supported just something for the sake of enjoying it. And I was able to find that through your program. And it's one of the reasons I've had such a great time. And I've made it a really big point to be a great teammate to the folks in our gym.
And I think also too, man, maybe this is completely unrelated. We're having a very weird conversation tonight, but as adults, we invest an incredible amount of energy in making sure that our children have hobbies. I know parents that do insane things to make sure that their kids are involved in extracurricular activities. I know a dad that he had a company phone, no data, just you could just call it. And then he had his own cell phone. And he could not afford his kids' little league anymore. So he canceled his phone and was like, if you need to call me, just call me on my work phone, because he wanted to continue to pay for his kids' little league. And I can tell you countless stories about parents that do crazy things so their kids can be involved in sports and tutoring and activities. It seems like at some point in our life, maybe after high school or after college, that we stop being involved in extracurricular activities, where all of a sudden you work, you go home. I talk to parents, I talk to clients, I talk to students all the time. And I'm like, well, what are your hobbies? What are you interested in? And they'll be like, I don't have any hobbies. Okay, well, tell me about your life. Okay, I get up, I go to work. Okay, cool. I go to happy hour for a couple hours. Okay, nice. I pick up the kids. Questionable. All right. I go home, we make dinner, I watch Netflix, I go to bed. I'm like, all right, cool. You have 2 hobbies. You go to happy hour every day? Well, not every day. Monday through Friday? Yeah, I go to happy hour Monday through Friday. Okay. So hobby 1, you like to go to happy hour from like 5 to 7. And then you pick up your kids from their extracurricular activities. And then hobby 2 is you watch Netflix. Because the average human being watches 33 hours a week of Netflix, which is crazy. Or maybe I should say 33 hours a week of streaming platforms.
Everything has a plus, by the way.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying that you shouldn't watch Netflix, or I'm not saying that you shouldn't watch whatever. But what I'm saying is that you need something in your life that is hard, that challenges you, that has a community, that gives you a sense of enrichment that is just for you. Because if I watch Netflix all the time, I develop relationships with the people on the shows that I watch. And that feels like initially in the moment, like I'm spending time with my friends, but they don't call me. They don't check in on me. They don't know that I'm having a rough day and ask me if I'm okay. I read this statistic that the average person does not hear their name more than twice in a week.
Wow.
You know, I mean, and I don't know how true that is, but like, I don't really hear my name that much. Most people call me Coach, right? And I'm always like, oh, you just call me Paul, you know, and I'm kind of fine with either, you know, but I'm involved and talking to people every day. But the average person that works in now especially, some type of work from home kind of remote job and watches Netflix and has a cat or a dog probably do not hear their name quite often. That's like rough, man. So you need to, as an adult, you need to have things that challenge you, that give you a sense of community, that give you something to be a part of. I'm not a religious person. I'm not. But there was something very beneficial for our society when they went to church on Sundays, because you were spending time with the same people every week, and maybe once throughout the week you got together. And we have moved away from that even. So the average person has nothing in their life that pushes them to be better. Nothing in their life that is telling them to keep pushing forward. No one in their life that's asking them like the hard questions. I think one of the things that I see a lot in my gym with me is when people come in that have never really been involved in sports and I'm coaching them, they don't understand that coaching is not always me telling you how great you are. Often, coaching is not me telling you how great you are. And listen, I try to be not at all toxic. I try not to ever insult people. I try my hardest not to use harsh language. I don't ever come down on people in a like aggressive manner. I try not to. And I have had coaches that were incredibly toxic. You know, I've had, like, when I was in sports, you know, in high school and in middle school, that were like borderline abusive. I have a coach from the 3rd grade that I am wondering why no parent murdered him. Well, I'm like, wow, that guy was a dick. You know, like, no one said anything to him. Just being honest with people a lot of times, because they've never had anyone be honest with them before like that, is hard for them.
It's very risky.
Yeah.
Because they don't know if they can trust this person enough to be honest. And it's weird because being honest creates trust. Even with that honesty is saying, hey, I didn't handle this situation correctly, or hey, you know, you're not where you need to be, but you can be if you do X, Y, Z to get there.
One of the things as a coach that I picked up maybe the last year, I like to watch, like I said, I like continuing education. And I think that continuing education for me, for my industry, is a lot of different things. And one of the ways that you get continuing education is is understanding like the mental game, understanding the life. And one of the ways that you help people trust you is to admit your failures. The problem is that most people are not willing to admit their failures. So if I can't say, like, I made a mistake there, I'm sorry, that was my fault, it's going to be hard for people to trust you. The problem is that when you're a coach, it's also hard to admit your failures because often their effect, you failed this guy. Like, I'll have, someone that, I haven't seen in a while, and I'll be like, man, I haven't seen this person in a while. And I'm like, oh man, I need to message them. But it's hard. Like, I have over 100 students now. So if I haven't seen you for a week and I don't text you, it's not that I don't care about you. It's not that I'm not thinking about you. It's literally that maybe, like, I am thinking about you and I keep saying I'm going to text you, and I don't know, something gets in the way of that.
You get pulled in a different direction.
Yeah. But I've also, and this is going to sound terribly sad, I have trained with 2 people in my career as a martial artist that killed themselves. Where one day they just stopped showing up and people are like, oh, I was going to be seeing this guy for a while. And the next thing you know, I guess he wasn't doing so well. Because people that come to you in this industry, man, sometimes they're missing something. Like, you were missing something in your life, right? And maybe that's something that's like minor. Maybe you were missing something minor in your life. Maybe it was like a sense of fellowship, because like you were involved in sports and then you're not involved in sports as much anymore. And you're like, oh, I miss that. Or sometimes people come to you when they're going through a breakup, or sometimes people come to you when they're, changing careers, or like we had a bunch of people that came in during the pandemic where there was this kind of weird period in Florida where we had reopened everything, but there was a lot of people that were still unemployed. So they were getting paychecks, which is neither here nor there. And they needed something to do. So they started showing up to the gym, and they were showing up like twice a day, every day. And then all of a sudden they had to go back to work, and then we never saw them again. Man, that's rough, dude. Because then I'm like, what happened to that guy? What happened to this guy? What happened to this girl? You need something in your life that is, gonna push you to be better. And it doesn't have to be martial arts. For me, it was martial arts, but for a lot of other people, it's other things,
And another thing, especially with martial arts, but across anything that you pursue that's making you better, you don't have to be a world champion at it to be better and reap the benefits. It's the pursuit and the process that makes you the better person, and not the result.
I think I alluded to this the other day. When you first start training martial arts, there's so much external pressure from people that are not involved in martial arts that are asking you questions like, when are you going to compete, bro? Like, I have guys all the time, they're like, oh yeah, all my friends keep asking me when I'm going to fight. Well, is that something you're interested in? Well, I mean, like, yeah, kind of. Yeah, kind of's not really the answer, right? And I'm going to tell you, constantly in my entire career, people were always like, oh, when are we going to see you in the UFC? And I was like, never, man. Like, I'm never going to be that good. I'm never good enough. Now, I have cornered fighters in every major organization except the UFC. Okay, and not one championship either. I should every organization in the United States. I've never cornered a fighter in the UFC. So now those same assholes every day are asking me when they're going to see me cornering a fighter in the UFC. And I'm like, yo, dude, probably never. And that's just, I keep trying. I keep working hard. But there's so many X factors on that, I'm not, it hasn't happened yet. And it might never happen. And I have to be okay with that. Just like we created the podcast, and the first question people ask is like, are you the next Joe Rogan? Like, there's one Joe Rogan, man.
You do have the space guys behind you. But, as we talked about, the process of making this podcast is going to better you because you're getting so many skills that are going to translate for your life personally and professionally.
Man, just having the ability to sit down with cool people and get to know them. I have a guest coming in a couple weeks that I've been friends with for a really long time. I'm not going to spoil this. And she is a martial artist, but she's more involved in like the business world now. She doesn't really train as much anymore. She's more focused on building her business. I've been friends with her for many years. And I'm so excited about sitting down and talking to her about martial arts for an hour or two, because I don't really know a lot about her as a martial artist. I met her in a martial arts gym, and we've become friends, and we've been friends now for years, but I never really had a conversation where I was like, where did you start? How did you fall in love with it? Why did you leave it? And I'm so interested in what she's going to say. And for me, that's what the podcast is about. The podcast, yes, I would love, for someone other than Eugene in New Jersey to watch the show. Hey, Eugene, what's up? I have one guy from New Jersey that watches every week, and he messages me. I love you, dude. You're the only guy that watches.
Hi, Eugene.
Yeah, it's more than just that, because I would love for people to listen. But man, dude, the other day I was having this conversation where I was thinking, like, dude, if no one ever listens, the conversations are still super valuable. And the truth of the matter is these conversations that I'm having right now, like, the thing that makes Joe Rogan's podcast really interesting is that Joe Rogan has these people that are kind of like not the normal people that you'd see get interviewed. Like you have some expert on DMT come in and talk about it for 2 hours, right? Like, I'm not super interested in DMT, but like, I've never heard about this before. Tell me more, The conversations that I want to have on this podcast are the conversations that martial artists maybe sometimes have, but you never hear. You never sit down with someone that has just been training for 2 months and have a conversation with them about, like, hey, what am I doing really well? What am I doing really badly? Where do you think we need improvement? Where do you think that we don't? Those are the conversations that have made me a much better coach over the last couple of years. And I think that's the thing that people don't understand. Like, we were doing this, like, I go on a lot of hiking. I do a lot of hiking in my personal life. And I will go and hike like minimum 7 miles. I've done like 15 miles a lot. And I will go with usually one person, and people get upset about this because I don't want to go with multiple people. I want to go with one person, and I want to have a conversation with them for like 6 hours. And I know that sounds crazy, you know what I mean? But like, the first hour, it's so very topical and so very polite. And so, like, this is the things that we normally talk about in life. And then hour 2, they start to tell you stuff that, like, maybe they've never told anybody before, right? And I'm going to be honest with you. As a coach, some of those conversations have made me a fundamentally better coach, where people were like, 3 hours in, hey, I think we're lost. By the way, when you teach so-and-so, I don't like the fact that you say this. Really? Why? I don't think it relates to what you think it relates to. Okay. What should I say instead? You should say this. All right. I'm very interested in that.
And it's cool because when you approach those conversations as if the person you're talking to knows something that you don't, you can pick up those gold nuggets, but it takes time. And
it takes time.
You have to be able to hash out things, and it takes time to hash out those nuances and have the trust to take those risks conversationally.
When we go on these trips, like we went to Vegas, there was 5 of us that went to Vegas, and we stayed in Vegas for 6 days. And we're in a hotel. We were in an Airbnb together. And, 6 days together, training martial arts, staying in an Airbnb together. Bro, by day 2 or 3, you're really starting to dissect stuff. And you're like, yeah, man, like, at the gym, when we do this, we should try to do it a different way. And those conversations, I think, really make, really make a difference when you're trying to build something that's amazing. I read an article about Mark Zuckerberg, and when he was interviewing executives for Facebook, he would go on a hike with them, and he would just kind of interview them through the hike, and he felt like it kind of like got them out of that interview and mode and more into like a conversational mode. And, we all know Mark Zuckerberg's actually an android. So
have you seen that guy drink water?
Of course. That to me is like, I think the best conversations is when you're just kind of talking about a lot of stuff and you're having a free form conversation. So yeah, I don't know, to wrap this, conversation up, I really do hope that people listen to it and they get something of value from it and they take something away from it. But maybe at the end of the day, the value of the podcast for me is the conversation. And just because we have some headphones on and the microphone on, it legitimizes that conversation where I can say, hey, come over to my house and talk to me for 2 hours. But that to me is the value. In the same way that when I created the YouTube channel, the value of the YouTube channel was not me being famous. I didn't want to be famous. What I wanted to do was to figure out a way to get information out to my own students where they were having trouble with the technique. And I learn a lot from YouTube. Especially when it comes to, I hate to say this, college. If I had known how much when I would be in college that I would just be watching YouTube videos, that I probably wouldn't have paid all that money for college. But I created the YouTube channel because I wanted to be able to say to my students, hey, you know what? I would say, hey, go watch this video on how to wrap your hands. And then I would try to find a video that resembled the way that I liked hands wrapped. And then finally I was like, you know what? Screw it. I'm just going to make a video where I show people how I want hands to be wrapped. And that was for my students. I don't care if anybody else watches them, And now we have some videos that have like a lot of views. But I mean, at the end of the day, really all I care about is that my students, my team is world class. And for me to do that, I have to figure out a way to give out information.
And I think this is a great way to do that, as well as the videos. And I think when people look back and they see these conversations that we've had and you've had with others on the podcast, as well as just the experiences that they have, that's how they're going to remember you as a coach. They're going to remember you through these different memories and moments. Yeah. Some of which will be captured forever. Some of which are fleeting through memory.
Well, I had a student that trained with me for 6 months. Lives in Russia. Okay. And he trained with me for 6 months, within 6 months, became a really integral part of our culture and was like really involved in the gym, and then was like, hey man, I got to go home for a bit because of my visa. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to train for another 6 months. Well, now he's stuck, unfortunately in Russia for multiple reasons. One, because of COVID, and then two, because of the situation now in Europe. So he was supposed to come back. And then all of a sudden, like I said, the average person thinks they're going to train with you forever, but maybe they won't. And now he trained with me for 6 months. And now he's teaching in Russia. And he sent me yesterday an audio message, basically thanking me for how much I taught him in 6 months and how much he uses the lessons that I taught him to be a teacher now. And I think he's talking less about what I taught him as a martial artist and more about the culture and environment that we created at the gym for him. All right, man. Final thoughts. Anything for me?
Coach, what do you want to be remembered for?
Oh, man. Man, what do I want to be remembered for? To be very honest with you, I think I said this to somebody a long time ago. I'm probably not going to have kids. That's the truth of my life, is that for whatever reason, I'm not going to have children. But every person that I talk to and every person that I teach is a part of my legacy. And I want to be remembered as a positive force in the world. And the thing that I like about teaching is that you can very directly see your effect in someone's life. Like we had a student that came in a couple years ago that was just listless and kind of a mess. And now, 2 years later, he's got a better job. He's happier in life. He's putting positive out in the world, right? And then I want him to do the same thing that I did with him. I want him to do that with all of his employees now, right? And that's kind of what I want, is I just want to be remembered as someone that cared, and that's someone that put good into the world. And listen, man, I've had bad days. I've had, and like anybody else, I'm human and I make mistakes, and I can be kind of grouchy sometimes. I think I'm always right.
But you do the best that you can with the things that you have and the tools that you have.
I hope so. I hope I do. I mean, I don't know. I want to be remembered as being someone that put good into the world. And, when I die, I would like to. I love.
Wait, you're telling me you're not God?
No, I know. Hard to believe, right? I've been telling you guys that for such a long time. Listen, I love stories. I really like storytelling. One of my favorite things, and probably why I was inspired to do the podcast, is because I like telling stories. And I like sitting around with my friends telling stories. You know, my best friend died. My best friend growing up died 2 years ago. And one of my other friends that I grew up with died. Life is short, you know, and I've been to too many funerals already. And I've been to the funeral of a student. When I die, I hopefully not for many, many, many years, but I want to be, yeah, right. I want everyone that I had an effect on their life. I want them to get together somewhere, and I want them to sit around, and I want them to tell the funniest story that involved me. I don't want them to sit and cry and be upset and you know, like, say all these things, and I don't want to have this like depressing funeral. I want people to sit in a room and be like, yo, do you remember when Paul did this thing? Or, hey, do you remember this time that we all got pulled over and Paul did this? Or, you know, do you remember that stupid podcast that he was doing that, you know, he had to force his friends to come on and do, you know? Those are the things that I want, man. You know, and again, like I said earlier, I'm profoundly affected by the fact that people will hang on to things that you say that you have no intent on, like, I didn't say that and think that you'd remember it for 10 years. But it's true, man. Somebody says something to you, I can point out 7 or 8 things that people said to me in my life that it was probably a throwaway comment. It probably meant very little to them. They probably do not remember it today, but it stuck with me my whole life. And I hope that generally I'm putting out things that are going to have positive effects on people's lives. And listen, man, I know that there are people that I have wronged, or there are people that, you know, maybe think that I didn't care about them the way that I should have. You know, or like sometimes, a lot of times I get like shit for favoritism. Where like, oh, this guy, you know, Paul treats these people better than these people. Man, I don't believe that is true, but I do believe this. If somebody comes in and they're putting a lot of effort into the gym and they're putting a lot of effort into the program, obviously I'm going to give them probably more energy because they're giving me energy back. That's not favoritism. That's me directly giving you back the amount of energy that you're giving me. But that's hard. You know, I had a professor in college, Dr. Tom, that said most people live unexamined lives. And because it's very easy for us to look, you know, at other people's lives and say what they're doing wrong. I try to examine my life and look back on the things that I've done and the things that I've said and be honest and open with myself about those things. And I think that to be successful, you have to kind of inventory yourself.
And it can't just be January 1st of every year. It's got to be a continuing thing.
Listen, I love New Year's resolutions because I think it does give you an opportunity to like be honest and reevaluate. But yeah, man, you know, I think that every month you should sit down and with yourself and be like, oh, this was good. This was bad. You know, what did I accomplish? What didn't I accomplish? All right, Alex. Thank you so much for coming on to the Combat Theory Presents podcast. This very bare bones, none of our cool people here. For those listening, guys, Sammy Ryan is having other commitments right now, but hopefully she'll be back next week. Robert Spazzy Mangillo will be returning soon as well. I hope that just listening to me and Alex talk wasn't absolutely miserable. But hey, maybe it was. I don't know.
But Coach, even if it's just me and you, I appreciate the time. I appreciate the talk. It's always a pleasure.
Hey, thank you so much, man. I appreciate you.
Likewise.